Good evening. I hope you're prepared for this evening's festivities. Alfred Hitchcock. All right, Alfred Hitchcock was born in 1899. He died in 1988. He is linked with the books in this episode that is linked to Robert Arthur, who was an author and an editor. Robert Arthur was born in 1909. He died in 1969. And in a previous episode about the three investigators, which I will link below, I talked about Robert Arthur and Alfred Hitchcock, and I gave you some information there. Everything we're talking about today has Robert Arthur's stamp on it. He is credited on all of these books. So we're talking today about the brand. Now, when it comes to Alfred Hitchcock, I'm not interested even remotely about the gossip about how he liked Tippi Hedren, and she accused him decades later of sexual abuse and all of that. And I have no reason to believe or disbelieve her. I just don't care. I think it's really the issue is it means nothing to me. And there are other celebrities that have badmouthed Alfred Hitchcock. I could care less. I'm interested in Alfred Hitchcock as a filmmaker. I like his films. He did direct Rebecca, based upon the book by Daphne du Maurier, which is a great film, and some other great films. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what they are. But today we're talking about his books and the branding of Alfred Hitchcock in the 1960s. After Psycho came out, he was the biggest thing in Hollywood, one of the biggest. His best years were behind him. But he had a branding initiative that he did with
Robert Arthur.
And they created some things together that were incredible. He put together, with Robert Arthur doing all the work, Robert Arthur put together these collections of stories. Okay, I'm going to put the pipe down, I'm going to put the skull down, and we're going to talk about some of these great Alfred Hitchcock books. And we're going to start out with Alfred Hitchcock Solve Them Yourself Mysteries. So this is my original edition from the 60s, and this was put together by Robert Arthur. Robert Arthur worked exclusively with Alfred Hitchcock on all of his books, most of them, if not all of them. And Solve Them Yourself Mysteries was an absolutely fun book to read. And the mysteries are presented. There are 5 of them. Look at the end papers on these Random House books. And the stories were presented in a manner that you could have enough clues to solve them yourself. Hitchcock has a persona, I don't know if you can see that, who interrupts the story now and again and gives you a little commentary on what you're reading. So of the 5 stories, you would read through them and try and solve the mystery yourself. This was a unique book for its time period. And he also started doing this whole collection of Alfred Hitchcock books is what the topic here is. This is branding. This is Alfred Hitchcock's branding initiative. And the value of it are in the collections of stories, because Robert Arthur was himself a writer and an editor, and he shows up, he puts his own stories in these collections, but he also compiled them for Alfred Hitchcock. And I think I mentioned that at the beginning. Look at the end papers on this. With Hitchcock over here, just fantastic. And in the back, you've got Hitchcock in the chair, his face, and then over here. So this is a collection, Alfred Hitchcock's Ghostly Gallery, 11 Spooky Stories for Young People. Okay, for young people, that's what they say. So let's take a look at the authors represented here. The illustrations are by Fred Banbury. Fantastic. I just love this. They were so much fun. All right. We have Walter Brooks. We have Algernon Blackwood. I kid you not. Robert Arthur, of course. He was not unusual for Robert Arthur to include himself in any of these compilations. F. Marion Crawford. There's a forgotten name from the past.
He was a great writer.
Robert Arthur has another story here. H.G. Wells. Henry Kuttner. I kid you not. Henry Kuttner's entry in here, chosen by Robert Arthur, is Housing Problem. Lord Dunsany. Robert Arthur again. A.M. Burrage, and a story called The Isle of Voices by Robert Louis Stevenson. This Ghostly Gallery book is a treasure trove of short fiction, unabridged, unedited, chosen by Robert Arthur, and published under the brand name of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Fantastic material. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the fact that Hitchcock did all of these paperbacks back in the 60s. And they went on and on. They were also hardcovers, too. Here's the hardcover of... I have quite a few of the hardcovers as well. Stories That Scared Even Me. This is one of the few hardcovers I have with the dust jacket. Most of my hardcovers of this series don't have the dust jacket. We're going to talk about stories for late at night to begin. All right, so this is the hardcover of Stories for Late at Night, and this book features 24 stories. The paperback, which was split into two, More Stories for Late at Night and Stories for Late at Night, this paperback has 11 of the stories. So they cut it in half and put it out for the market. And the paperbacks were the ones that just took off. Really a profitable venture for the Alfred Hitchcock brand. All of these stories were chosen by none other than Robert Arthur. Now, let's take a look at some of these stories. I'm going to read to you the complete list of titles, the authors represented here. Robert Arthur, Jerome Bixby, Ray Bradbury, Ruth Chatterton, John Collier, Roald Dahl, John B.L. Goodwin, C.L. Moore, Brett Halliday, you mystery fans, William Hope Hodgson, Cyril Hume, M.R. James, Will F. Jenkins, Frank Belknap Long, Philip MacDonald, and there's more. The Fly by George Langland is in here, which is the complete novelette. Gouverneur Morris, Edward L. Perry, Margaret Ronan, Henry Slessor, what a writer that man was. There's a forgotten name. Are there any collections of Henry Slessor out there right now? Great thriller writer. I mean, if not for Hitchcock, would he be forgotten? I'm just speculating. I haven't looked into that, but I don't know anyone talking about Henry Slessor. He was a superb writer. Pauline C. Smith, Robert Trout, Evelyn Waugh, and Margaret Miller. Margaret Miller was Ross MacDonald's wife. So you have a difference here between... This was split into two paperbacks, of which I only have More Stories for Late at Night. And there's only 11 in here. So I'll have a scan of that. So this edition eliminates Robert Arthur, Ray Bradbury, John Collier, and C.L. Moore, M.R. James, Frank Belknap Long, and Margaret Miller, and a few others. So for you bibliophiles, the splitting up of the hardcovers into multiple paperbacks can be a little confusing, but it was necessary because the books were so long, and it's not necessarily a small typeset. And so Hitchcock and actually Robert Arthur, would choose an enormous amount of material to put into these books. Now, this one is Stories That Scared Even Me. This is a great collection. So let me read you some of the authors in here. We have Robert Arthur, of course. He was pretty clever in including himself in these collections, which is fine. Hitchcock didn't care. He was making money off of it. But we have Nugent Baker, Algis Budrys. I knew Algis Budrys in Chicago. John Burke, Irvin S. Cobb, Basil Copper, Marion Allen DeFord, Thomas Dish, Adobe James, Gerald Kirsch, Damon Knight, Fritz Lieber. Listen to these names. E. Philip Oppenheim, Ellis Peters. Ellis Peters was great. Ray Russell, Margaret St. Clair, William Sambrot, Henry Slessor. Again, I really like Henry Slessor's stories. I think there should be a whole renaissance of interest in Henry Slessor as far as I'm concerned. Donald E. Westlake. Yes, he's in here. And T.H. White, best known for The Once and Future King. Yes, he's in here. A story I've never seen anywhere else called The Troll. And William Wood in a novelette by Theodore Sturgeon, the great science fiction writer, called It. It. Yes, I am confident that Stephen King is well aware of all of this material. I'm not dissing Stephen King at all. In a previous episode about August Derleth, I mentioned It as a character, a monster in one of August Derleth's stories. Stephen King is well aware of these authors and what they produced. And that's fine. I am a Stephen King fan. I'm a constant reader. I don't have a problem with that. And then John Wyndham's novel, Out of the Deeps, is represented in full in this collection. This is, again, the cultural value of Alfred Hitchcock as a brand name in the 1960s is this repository, this collection, this library of forgotten authors and classic pulp tales. Not all of them are pulp tales, however. John Collier was represented here, and he wrote for the Slicks. He wrote for Cosmopolitan. So you have a good mixture of tales, but authors who are, many of them generally forgotten. There's some big names here if you've been paying close attention. So I have, with the hardcovers, I also have Stories That Scared Even Me, A Month of Mystery, and Stories to Stay Awake By. Now, in this one, we have some fascinating people. This is the one I just told you about. We have some fascinating people that show up in these books. And I wanted to point that out to you because Robert Arthur was so skilled. I'm waiting for a Robert Arthur renaissance. I'm waiting to see collections put out by his family of Robert Arthur material, a biography by the family, collections of his stories. Robert Arthur, Henry Slessor. These are forgotten authors who were so good at what they did. And I'm just excited to talk about them and to put this out here again for you guys on these books. Henry Slessor and all these guys are in here. Let's take a look at some of the paperbacks because that's really where the money was. These books were cheap. So let's start with Alfred Hitchcock's Happiness is a Warm Corpse. That was a 60-cent paperback, right? And who are the authors included here? Let's just take a quick look at some of these guys. Raj Phillips, he is very well known as a science fiction writer. And by the way, some of these stories do include science fiction elements in these various tales. We have Fletcher Flora, that's a forgotten name. Richard Deming, that's a forgotten name. Hal Elson, that's a forgotten name. And onward and upward with all of these. I just love the cover artwork. And Hitchcock was always lampooning himself, but it worked. Alfred Hitchcock's Death Bag. Now, these are from the 60s. There is in here, we have Hal Elson again, Henry Slessor. Good Lord. If it wasn't for Alfred Hitchcock, would he be a totally forgotten author? And the reason I say that is because I know a lot of vintage paperback collectors that go out of their way to collect these Hitchcock collections. I do too. H.A. DeRosso. Did I just say that right? Of course I did. H.A. DeRosso. I have an episode where I visited this fine author's resting place. And I've been there twice, and I'm going to try and go back a third time. By the time this airs, I may have been there. I'm going to try and do a cleanup on the grave. Revenge is Bittersweet by H.A. DeRosso. Will you find that story anywhere else? I don't know. How about Robert Edmund Alter and Hal Dressner? These are all great tales. Alfred Hitchcock's Coffin Corner. It's just so much entertainment value involved in Hitchcock. We have another H.A. DeRosso. That's correct. A Time for Rifles. We have August Derleth, the amateur philologist, is in here. And another Richard Deming and various others. Interesting lost stories, if not for Robert Arthur and Alfred Hitchcock, who allowed this to happen, who is the one who benefited the most because he made the most money off of it. It was a very successful brand name. We don't see this type of thing going on today. Sam's Heart, wonderful tale by guess who? Henry Slessor. Robert Bloch is in here. Luck is No Lady, and Fletcher Flora. Donald E. Westlake is in here again. Oh boy, August Derleth. Now this is a famous story by August Derleth. It's Adventures of the Sussex Archers. I think most of you familiar with him have read that story, as well you should. If not, check out Alfred Hitchcock's Skull Session. What year was this? Skull Session was 68, so you can get Alfred Hitchcock's Skull Session for August Derleth. Games Killers Play. This is probably 68 as well, and I'm guessing it's 67. So we have August Derleth again represented in here, along with Henry Slessor. He must show up in damn near all of them. And Donald E. Westlake again, Hal Elson, and so forth. These are magnificent, exciting lost tales for you to seek. Games Killers Play, collected by Robert Arthur on behalf of Alfred Hitchcock. More stories, not for the nervous. And this is also 65, so this is earlier. More stories, not for the nervous. And who do we have in here? Let's see, Richard Matheson. You see what I mean? I mean, he's not forgotten at all. Hal Dressner is back in here. Richard Matheson's story, by the way, is called Lemmings. We have Robert Arthur again representing himself. Henry Slessor, beautiful story by Henry Slessor called Something Short of Murder. Lovely. Ellis Peters? Yes, the great Ellis Peters. Margaret St. Clair again, and Jack Ritchie. And we have a novel in here by Lucille Fletcher and Alan Ullman. The title might be familiar to you movie fans. Sorry, wrong number. That's correct. Right here in More Stories Not for the Nervous, collected by Robert Arthur on behalf of the late, great Alfred Hitchcock. Stories Not for the Nervous. That was More Stories, so I should have done this first. And this is 65 as well. Ray Bradbury. Right at the top, you get a Ray Bradbury story. Gerald Kirsch. There's a forgotten name. Dorothy L. Sayers, one of the great suspense writers of all time, is represented in here. Joseph Payne Brennan. You guys know these names. How about Bruno Fisher? Yeah, I've covered him. I believe I have an episode where I talk about him. Carter Dixon and Frederick Brown. Are you kidding me? Frederick Brown. Wow. So there you have just a quick overview of some of these magnificent stories collected by Robert Arthur for Alfred Hitchcock that are highly collectible, not very expensive, and well worth your time. Some of the hardcovers, too, have really superb cover artwork and dust jackets. I have a couple on my list that I'm looking for. I think I looked about a week ago on eBay and I saw one I really wanted, but I'm traveling, so I got to watch the budget. But anyways, so there you have a little bit of that going on. Alfred Hitchcock, all these many years later, a cultural phenomena during his lifetime, who was responsible for allowing Robert Arthur to put together on his behalf some really fantastic anthologies. Well worth your time, you book collectors, to hunt them down. Okay? Hunt them down, read them to yourselves, read them to your friends, and get to it. Thank you, my friends, for checking in to this off-the-wall episode. I want you to stay well, stay happy, feed your brains, read a book.